going live. It's going. It's so slow every time.
I'm just going to whisper until we're live.
We're live now.
Hey, everyone. We're being playful.
All right. Yay. We are officially live now. Welcome to the Social Hour. My name is Nicole. I'm a photographer, a writer, and a digital artist. And with me today, we have the amazing fashion and portrait photographer, Jonny Edwards. He is new to Pro EDU's education lineup for this coming year. He has got mentoring sessions available, and he's been working with designers and amazing models and makeup artists in the Denver area. I'm super excited to have him on. We've been kind of part of the same social circle for a little while, and so this is long overdue, sir. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor. I'm very excited to be here.
Me too, especially because we have been talking about our newest business venture where we're basically going to put magical artifacts out into the world, and so we can prank people.
And no, we have not been doing psychedelics on the back end. This is actually a legitimate idea, so please don't take this and run with it. You can collaborate with us, but don't steal our intellectual property. That is,
yeah, really, don't steal it.
Nice.
Like if that was on your mind,
yeah,
you're not a very nice person.
I was just gonna say that's like one of the best bits to live by. Just don't be a jerk, and like everything else kind of falls in place. But
that's true. That's just how you got to be, like as a human.
True that.
But I think that's going to be super fun. So before we get into other cool stuff, let me know, how has this been for you? I know for so many of us, this whole isolation thing has been really kind of a struggle and the series of ups and downs. How have you been handling everything?
You know, I think it's definitely undulated. So up and down is kind of that. You'd have to ask me any moment. Initially, it was kind of nice. You know, I'm a very social person and I'm very outgoing, but I'm also very introverted. And so I have to recharge my batteries, and I normally don't engage in self-care that way. So when this first happened, I was forced to kind of come inside and focus on myself and do these things. But then I think all that isolation leads to having to confront a lot of aspects of ourselves that maybe we've been avoiding, or maybe we didn't even know were necessarily things that we needed to address. So that definitely became a point of contention. And then I started channeling that into some of my self-portraiture work, which was a great release, because normally for me, when I'm feeling a lot of tension or anxiety, or if I'm, even dealing with a little bout of like transient depression, I'm like, okay, I need to create. I want to transmute those feelings into art. And that's why art is such a powerful conduit for me, not only as a source of expression, but it just, like self-care in a way. And not having that was very, very challenging. So I think it was good overall, or it has been good. Like, it hasn't been good in the context of course, this grand tragedy that's befalling all of us as society. But for me personally, as an individual, as a man and artist, I think it's forced me to go inward and connect with some parts of myself that I haven't connected with in a long time. And also to address like what I really want, like what are my priorities as an artist and as an individual moving forward, what's important to me, and create a hierarchy that better represents kind of the life that I want to live and the type of art that I want to create on a move forward basis. So it's been good and bad, but I think overall it's been an immense period of growth for me. And in that respect, I'm grateful for better and worse.
Yeah, that's outstanding. I think the possibility is probably there for so many of us to be able to really take that time for self-reflection. But for people who, I always kind of think of self-reflection as like a learned skill, right? Because absolutely. So many of us experience our lives as if we are part of everything, rather than that aspect of your mind that is like actually detached and can look at things in retrospect, or like look inside and realize that you're separate from your experiences. And so for people who have that skill, I think this can definitely be a really powerful time. And so hopefully people who have not been experiencing that and have just been kind of living through their emotions and these ups and downs of like, okay, maybe things are getting better. Oh, there's new outbreaks, or, just with all of this kind of news, hopefully they can take that example and realize that this could be a time that you can use for reflection and growth, and to maybe chart what your course is going to look like after. Well, I don't want to say after this is all over, because I have a feeling it's just going to be a new thing.
I agree.
But hopefully they can take that as an example.
Well, and I hope so too. And at the same time, I think that another thing that this whole time has taught me is to just kind of meet myself where I'm at. And, some days I feel extremely productive and motivated and inspired. And it's like, what do I want to do? And then other days I'm like, okay, getting out of bed and just doing the basics of, taking a shower and feeding myself is enough. So at the same time, I just want to put it out there to those people who maybe, are struggling. I also don't have kids. I don't have, all of these other responsibilities. So obviously my circumstances are different than anyone else, but regardless of, where anyone's at and how this experience has been, there is no right and wrong during this. We're all trying to navigate unknown territory, and we're all trying to do our best relative to our specific circumstances. So, for me personally, I know if I'm struggling and I hear someone's doing good relative to circumstance, I can kind of get down on myself. And so if anyone's out there and they're struggling, definitely don't get down on yourself, because wherever you're at is kind of where you need to be, and it's okay. So just embrace yourself there.
Yeah, agree. If all you can do that day is get out of bed and make yourself something to eat and wash your ass, then that is
Celebrate
good
that.
enough.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah,
and prioritize washing your ass. That's really important. Like, just for the
well,
general good.
At least every few days.
It's like a
You're just
Monday,
hanging out at
Wednesday,
home.
Friday
You're not getting
thing.
that dirty, right?
I mean, I guess my lifestyle is different than most.
Okay, we'll mandate that every day for you, just to keep the rest of us safe.
Thank you. I'm trying to stay accountable here.
So far, we have got some amazing people joining us in the comments already. Scott Abel says he loves your style.
Oh,
so
thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Scott is an actor here in New Mexico that I've worked with a few times. Yeah, he's outstanding. And then Stone Tree Creative is here and said, hey there, the film noir is fantastic. So fitting for you, Jonny.
That would be Mr. Stagliano. Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
I agree. And Rosa Sempolinska, please tell me I pronounced that right, is here with us. So is Kelly Robitaille, who says you are looking awfully dapper.
Oh.
Olga Tanyanyan is here as well. She says, ayo. And Gary Monroe is waving, and Kat Ford Coates is here saying you look handsome as always.
Oh.
So glad.
I'm overwhelmed. I'm going to have to run away now. My humility that I use to mask my self-dysfunction is just wavering right now. So thank you everyone so much. Once again, it's such a pleasure to be here, and I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. So yes, thanks for joining us.
It's hard for that to stand up in the face of so much love, isn't it?
It's so true.
So super glad you're all joining us. Thank you. If you guys have questions for Jonny, make sure that you write them down so we can try to get to them as we chat. And remember that this is partly to learn more about Jonny and his work and all of that stuff, but also just to have cool conversations with cool people. So
ask away, everyone. I'm an open book. I promise to answer truthfully, as obscene or egregious as that might be.
Kat wants to know if it helps if she berates you.
Let's wait for another 10 minutes before we start the berating. I think I'll be into a good flow then, and then we can just berate away.
Right. As his ego gets larger, we'll just puncture it a little bit. Let the air out slowly.
We're going to maintain homeostasis. Yeah. It'll be tricky, but I think we're going to manage.
We'll grow a little, we'll shrink a little. It'll be all right.
That's life. It's the cyclical nature of things.
That is absolutely true. So I have the privilege of being able to watch you grow over the last few years, from when I kind of first showed up in the Colorado area and people being like, hey, have you, do you know Jonny, or makeup artists that I was able to work with that had worked with you, and getting to see your work. And then over the last few years, just watching your ability skyrocket. So what has that growth, what has driven that growth? Because I feel like you were all of the signs of having, vision and talent and everything were there. And then all of a sudden within, I think probably the last 3 years or so, I've just watched you evolve so much. Is there something that's been driving that?
For me, it's really obsession. And I think that that's a good thing and it's a bad thing, but I'm a very obsessive person. So when I delve into something, I do it wholeheartedly, probably much to the chagrin of people in my life who would like to share some of that time with me. But photography the relationship with photography started very early on for me, and then came back later in life. And when I picked up a camera again, I was in a really bad place. I was dealing with anxiety and depression, the loss of some family. And so photography really saved my life. And I don't say that in a way that's an exaggeration at all. So I think there's been a certain amount of indebtedness to me. And, kind of when I got into the fashion scene and I started shooting more portraits, I realized that it offered me this beautiful ability to connect with other human beings. So I was able to see them and hear them. They were able to see me and hear me. And I really wanted to honor that process. So I wanted to become as good as I possibly could be as an artist in terms of both my technical skill and just, where I'm at creatively, in order to be able to, honor myself and also honor those who step in front of my camera. And it's the first time in my life where I feel like I'm doing something that's truly a calling for me. And, I can't say that it's going to be the same thing tomorrow, but right now this feels in large part like it's my life's purpose, what I'm doing and how I'm doing it and who I'm doing it with. And so it's a cross between just massive amounts of obsession, a thirst for knowledge, just passion, and then once again, just incredible amounts of gratitude, both for the medium of photography itself and for, everyone who has given me the opportunity to work with them, which has just been, an amazing experience each and every time.
I love that. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit about that balance between so many people who succeed in a field. They will often talk about it. It is kind of an obsession. It does become something that you have to pour yourself into, to the exclusion of a lot of other things. So for you, is work-life balance a thing? I've found that it's a teeter-totter, right? Like sometimes you're there for a second and then you're heavy on one side, and then you're there for a second and you're heavy on the other side. What is that like for you?
Well, I think it's become a lot better, but for the longest time, I was definitely kind of embroiled in a pattern of giving too much and then burning out. So I would literally just work 24/7. And then it got to the point where literally I had nothing left to give. And so I would retract, not because it was a conscious decision I was making, but because I felt like just broken in a way. So I would push myself to the point of breaking and then have to heal and repair. So people who know me well know that there's been periods of time when I just disappear, from the social world, from the art world, from all of these things. And that for me was just a necessity so that I could keep going. So I'm trying to be more conscious of that for myself and to just enjoy other aspects of life. What I really realize is the more time I spend with loved ones, the more time I spend traveling, the more time I spend going to museums and the cinema and doing all of these things that I really enjoy, that drive me as a man and human being, getting outdoors, one of the most important things, and into
Mm.
nature. The more inspired I feel and the better able I feel to create when I'm behind the camera again. So I think for me, it's coming to an understanding that balance not only is a necessity for me just as a human being to be okay and to feel good, which is the top priority, but more importantly, if I want to consistently produce my best work, I have to find that intermediary where I'm taking care of myself. Otherwise, everything suffers, including what I'm putting out there, and then that just becomes kind of a vicious cycle. So I'm doing my best to avoid those vicious cycles and those dysfunctional patterns.
Yeah, it's hard. It's
It
hard,
is.
especially when something carries so much of your heart in it and when you find so much meaning and purpose in it, which I feel
Absolutely.
like is very, very clear, particularly for me, at least in your portraits. There's always this sense of really intimate connection between the sitter and you, but then also the viewer as well, because that emotion in the face, that they're obviously comfortable working with you, and then there's a really intimate connection there, especially in the eyes. I find sometimes also in body language, but I feel like we can really, really feel that that love for what you're doing and that passion for the people that you're working with in your portraiture.
And that means a lot to me. And it goes back to me to just honoring the people who sit in front of me. As photographers, what we do is very intimate. We ask people to sit in front of us. And even if it's a commercial project, if someone comes in and they're embodying, a certain persona for that project, they're still exposing themselves in a way that is extremely intimate. And so I always seek to honor that and to respect and appreciate whomever steps in front of my lens. And I want to create a space, especially if it's more for fine artwork or with individuals where we're not working off a creative brief, where it's like, well, who are you in this moment? Let's meet you here in this moment and allow you to be whoever you are. And so a lot of times my projects will take a different direction, and the tone of my work will change from what I initially planned for or anticipated, because that's just what the day dictated. That's just what emotion dictated and what the individual dictated. And that's just really important to me. And it's always a driving force in my work. And it's really, honestly, very wonderful to hear you say that and to know that shines through. That's a huge validation for me as an artist. So thank you for saying that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't say it if I didn't think it was true.
Well,
So
thank
I
you as well.
really like that you bring up that that vulnerability, because I feel like your presence in general and also online is really characterized by that vulnerability with the people you interact with and with your audience. I think you're always super transparent with people about what you're going through or how you feel or how you are approaching something. And is that for you um, just the way that you need to kind of communicate and be with people? Or is that something that you feel like is it a necessity, or is it kind of a premeditated, I know I need to let people in type of thing?
I think it can be a little bit of both depending on the moment. What I've learned over the course of time is that, I love Brene Brown, just as a side note, but I've learned that, vulnerability is strength. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's funny because growing up, and this will come around here, I'm a roundabout person, but growing up, I kind of grew up in this twofold area. I was very like artistic kid. I was very precocious and eccentric, but I also, grew up in a very machismo type of environment where it's like you were
Mm.
fishing, you were hunting, you were fighting if someone insulted you. So that really kind of got embedded into my subconscious. So especially as I started to get into art more heavily, obviously it's rooted in expression, and expression is adjacent to vulnerability. So I think I realized that I needed to be vulnerable in order to, express and connect. And it's a twofold thing. It helps me because if I'm able to let go of those things and be who I am in that moment, um, I guess there's a sort of acceptance that happens from within, and that's beautiful. And what I love about that too is when we're vulnerable and when we're open, we encourage others to do the same. And
Hmm.
especially on social media, it's going to sound really cliche to say, but I think there's so much artificial construct that exists where people only show the very best, or they're having the worst time and they jump on and it's like, life is good, doing my thing, mimosas, and so there's this like kind of desire and driving force to put something out there to make everyone think that things are just fine, and that's not human. As human beings, we have good days and we have bad days, and those things can coexist at the same time. I could be enjoying this interview and loving every moment of it and still thinking of something, or there can be an aspect of me that's sad or down. So for me, it's really been, I guess, a challenge to myself to say it's something that I've always struggled with, being vulnerable and open. And so to do that to an audience and in front of people is a big deal. And then to be validated and having people seeing me being vulnerable, and then for them in turn to be vulnerable, that mutual exchange has been very powerful. So I think it was a necessity. And I think now it's more a point of, desire, something that I want to do and continue to work on and evolve because I feel better. And in the process of me feeling better, I think a lot of times it helps other people feel better. And that's just a really beautiful, profound feedback loop that I'm all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in a really strong way, it gives people permission, right? Like
Yes.
they feel like they have to be putting that best face forward all of the time. And to see somebody that they respect or somebody they look up to be able to just be open and vulnerable that way is kind of a great way to give them permission to say, yeah, you can do this too.
Agreed. Wholeheartedly.
Yes. So a couple comments. Let's get to a couple questions. We have Kelly Robitaille wants to know if you can recognize the moment when you realized you had found your own style.
Ooh, wow. Way to stifle me, Kelly, you bitch. Um, uh, you know, I really believe in that apprentice model when it comes to anything, when it comes to art, when it comes to, trades. I think that we start by emulation. And so I definitely started by emulation and, regurgitation as far as like lighting goes and posing and things like that. And I can't define the exact details, but I do remember being on like a fashion shoot and I had my mood board down. I'm like cross-referencing Pinterest and I like printed things out and I'm like holding it under while I'm talking to my creative team, just like, oh yeah, I'm just talking to my mom while I'm like going, okay, this is going to be the next pose, and trying to really choreograph all of that. And then, the model that I was working with at that point in time had a background in dance and it was very fluid. And I kind of looked at it and I'm like, I just want to try this. And so I stopped and I did it. And I just felt this weight drop off of me. And the reason being was I was staying present in the moment. And, I brought up Brene Brown. Eckhart Tolle is another one with The Power of Now.
Hmm.
Amazing book. Everyone check that out. But I found myself completely in a flow state because rather than trying to do something specific, I was interacting dynamically with my circumstances and, allowing the hairstylist to come in and change the hair and my wardrobe stylist to go, hey, you know what? Like, I love what you're doing here, but like, let's change this. And it felt like everyone just got into this place where they were applying their specific trades and passions, and it felt beautiful. And I think for me, that the moment probably came when I started getting some external validation, and I wish I could say that it was something that happened internally, but I think as artists, we're beholden to our communities and to other artists, and people started to say, "Oh, Jonny, when I saw that photo, I knew that was yours. I knew it. I knew it was yours right away." And having that external validation allowed me to start seeing my work through a new perspective. And then I started to see some of those defining factors at that point in time that really spoke to my work. And it was a really beautiful thing because I obsessed about having a visual signature. I obsessed about how are people going to know this is my work? We're in a sea of so much imagery and in a sea of so much talent. How was I going to differentiate myself? So I think it came out of that obsession, but really it was, people like Nicole, who really kind of gave that to me and provided some encouragement and perspective and insight. And I think it's far too easy to become insular. I think we need to become receptive so long as that receptivity is I guess, given to the right people, who
Sure.
have some ground to stand on. Because, the guy down the street, Bill, who does what he does, might not be the best judge of my work, but Kelly certainly could judge my work, and I would be okay.
I love that. And I think probably a lot of photographers can relate to that because you do start off in a very derivative fashion, right? Because
Absolutely.
you don't really, you have taste maybe, but you don't necessarily have the skill or the abilities to bring your vision to fruition. And so you do rely on those visual markers that, this comes from somebody who knows what they're doing. And so if I do this, it's going to at least look like I know what I'm doing. Until soon you do find out that you know what you're doing. And then I
Yeah.
think that definitely seems to be when vision starts to flourish. And I agree. I think the flow state is the most amazing place in the world to be. I think it is addictive and probably why so many of us creatives just can never not live that life or do that work, because to be there in that moment and feel like the universe is flowing through you to create a thing is like the best place in the world to be.
Well, it's beautiful. And I agree wholeheartedly. And I think another important part about that community aspect is just seeing that like people whom I admired and respected, who I held here at kind of the top of the totem pole, so to speak, that when I got into these groups and communities on Facebook and on Instagram or went to workshops or just meetups, realizing that these folks experience discomfort too, because I was looking for this marker inside of my own mind to go, okay, when I'm absolutely confident, when I just get out there and I'm like, Jonny, you're fucking amazing and everything you do is amazing and you can't do anything wrong, then I'll know I've made it. And it's like, well, that's an unattainable goal. And I don't think that's anything that anyone of merit really experiences. So it was also realizing that there wasn't going to be this grand kind of like epiphany where things were necessarily going to and I don't want to go against what Kelly was saying, but kind of like click in a way where it was just going to be like, okay, the switch is on now. It's like, it's more of like a dimmer switch where it's going to vacillate. So just trying to find myself in that process too, which is a little bit vague, but it's a truth for me at least.
No, I sometimes there are no exact hard and fast answers.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
people will have that moment where they're like, oh my God, I have made the thing and now the heavens have opened and glory is raining down on me. And then other people will be like, it was kind of in between this couple year period where I was trying new things. So it's definitely, going to be really individualized.
Well, and I think the other thing about it too, that's an important topic of discussion for creatives, especially people who are working on developing their voice and their style and their aesthetic, is that, the refractory period is a very real thing too. So when you
Truth.
do have that experience where, you get this and you go, oh my gosh, I've created this thing, there's always that pullback after and the deconstruction, but then that also sets a new precedent. So now the next thing that you create has something to be compared against. So it's a give and take process. And I try and, tell people who ask me about it, well, what has your trajectory been like? And I'm like, well, from the outside looking in, on this macroscopic level, it looks like it's been this straight line, but the reality is if you zoom in to the microscopic aspect, it does this. And so as you move out, it looks very linear, but when you're in it, there's days, even when you're at the highest level, which I'm absolutely not, but still there's days when, you feel like you're on top of the world and what you're doing is substantial and you feel great about it. And there's days when you're looking at the same body of work in the same body as a human being, having the complete opposite thoughts going, everything I do is subpar, I'm just an and you go straight Eeyore with it.
Yep.
So, and that's okay. Which I think is a big thing. Cause it's, we have those days and it's, sometimes you just have to feel that way. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, you definitely do still have to give yourself permission to realize that you're never going to stay on top of the world. Like if you make it to the top for a little while, you're coming back down and that's all right. Yeah, that is okay to be there. It was so great. We have a few more questions. Gary Monroe is wondering, what is your process to bring out the person in front of your lens compared to how you may be meeting them for the first time for the shoot?
I always like to try and book more time than I need, regardless of the project. And that's so I have an opportunity to really get to know someone on set or on location or in my studio. And people who have been around me know that I talk a lot. I mean, that's probably just common knowledge to anyone who's watching this right now. But I talk a lot. I put down my camera a lot. I ask a lot of questions. I'm genuinely interested in people. And I think that's one of the biggest things is going back to it. It sounds so cliche, but when you ask a person a question and they answer, and then you ask follow-up questions and there's eye contact and you're leaning in and you're interested, they feel so valued that the natural, almost subconscious response is to open up. So whenever possible, I try and build out enough time and, just be courteous and respectful. There's these really basic things I think that help operationally in terms of behavior that are oftentimes left out in the industry and communicating. I think that's another really funny thing is people come to me and they're nervous and I'm just a human being. So if my flash doesn't fire or if my camera settings are off or if I leave the lens cap on, I'm the first person to say to whoever is in front of me, I'm like, well, look at this. I'm like, you came to me and you're paying me money to shoot you. I can't even take the lens cap off my lens. And so it kind of dismantles the hierarchy, I think, because as photographers, once again, we're holding the camera and we get to hide behind this camera. And then someone's in front completely exposed. And so it's important to drop that camera and to also expose ourselves. So there is reciprocity in that vulnerability. So put your best foot forward and open up and be open and receptive. And I think 9 times out of 10, you're going to get that from whomever is standing or sitting or posing or dancing or whatever in front of you.
Beautiful. I love that. Um, Gary, I hope that answered your question. I think it probably did. And Rosa asks, do you prefer to work alone with a model or do you like large production teams?
Both. I think it varies a lot on the person. There's definitely a part of me that loves the intimacy of just those one-on-one shoots when you get to connect in a very serious way. At the same time, I think there's something really brilliant. If you have a really amazing creative team, the energy and the insight and the creativity that can emerge from a room full of people who love what they do and are excited to be there cannot be replicated if you're there by yourself. So I think it really depends on the circumstances. One of the reasons that I do love working in fashion and working in editorial work is I have an opportunity to work with so many like ridiculously talented human beings, people who blow my mind, and to sit there and have conversations and ask for their insight. And you look over and you see people smiling and everyone's looking at the back of the laptop going, oh shit. Oh, and all of this stuff. And so it's just this camaraderie that's beautiful. In the community. And once again, at the same time, there's experiences that you're going to have when there's only one person in front of you. Certainly I have that could never happen if it was a room full of people. So I value both. And I think both have their place relative to the project and relative to who you're working with.
Yeah, agree. I think so much of that comes down to the purpose of the shoot, right? I mean, especially some of your work with Kate is the feeling is so raw and intimate. And I mean, she's fantastic anyway, but that sense that you are alone. I mean, even if you weren't alone, even if there was an entire team of people there, there's that sense of just a one-on-one intimacy that doesn't always come about when you're working with a huge team of people, as opposed to those creative shoots where the ideas are flying and creativity is flowing and changes are happening. And it's kind of a different ballgame, isn't it?
Well, it is. And, I think regardless of what the shoot is or the project, I still try and put the blinders on when I'm working with people. So even if I am there with a big team, I try and create that kind of tunnel almost when it's appropriate relative to the shoot where it's just this, and even queuing relative to that, and people will kind of queue up. So I think, it's feeling out the room. It's kind of like being, a comic on stage. You think you're going to do great with your tight five and you start telling a few jokes and then there's crickets or people start booing you. And you either shift or you sink. So it's just being in sync with who's there, whether that's one person or whether that's 20 people, and really trying to adjust relative to, the energy and the dynamic of the room. That's so, so important and something that's hard to teach. I think it really only comes from experience and observation.
True. And then also, like we talked about before, that ability to do a little self-reflection and realize that that's something that you want to cultivate in order to make those kind of relationships with your subject be more open or honest or comfortable.
Absolutely.
Oh my gosh, sorry. my pug is like desperate to get in my lap
Yes,
right now. I pushed her
buddy.
away like 4 times and she's still hi.
Oh, I heard the breathing. I was going to ask about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
I was
she
like,
was
what
jumping
is
up and scratching at my leg like I have to be part of this equation right now. Okay, chill out. Jeff Benyon is here with us as well, and he wonders if your wardrobe stylists ever get intimidating that your style is better than theirs, or get intimidated and feel like your style is better than theirs.
I think it's curious. It's funny. I actually just had a conversation about this recently. I love, obviously I love fashion. I love styling. I don't think there's ever an intimidation necessarily. I think, wardrobe is something where I think a lot of photographers tend to be very hands off. It's kind of like, oh, I want to have a say in makeup. I want to have a say in hair. But when it comes to that, there's some discomfort with style. And I have no discomfort. I love it. So I think for me, it's more camaraderie. Most stylists will come to me, and if I bring a stylist on, or if a stylist is brought on for a project, I make it very clear that they're there because they're experts in what they do. I never want to step on toes. I never want to get in someone's way, and they're there because they're supposed to be there, and that's their role. But at the same time, I love when a wardrobe stylist or a makeup artist or whomever comes to me and they're like, hey, Jonny, I was thinking about pairing this with either, this skirt or these kind of pants. What do you think? And I'm like, well, I would go with this just because, but you decide what's best, and then step back. So I don't think there's ever intimidation. And I think for me, it really comes down to respect. Again, the people that I work with, I always try and let them know how much I respect them, how much I appreciate them. And they're there because they're amazing at what they do, just like I'm there because I'm amazing at what I do. And I think when everyone's there and they know their role and purpose and they're honoring everyone else's space and role, there's never really going to be an issue with intimidation or discomfort or that type of thing. And I always vie to have an environment for everyone that's just fun and exciting, where people are happy and they want to be there making art.
Yeah, and it's such a valuable thing if your team loves working with you and they want to
Yes.
come back and work with you again. People
Big deal.
underestimate. Yeah, I've seen too many times photographers come onto the scene and they start working with people that I have worked with many times and mistreating them. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm ready to fight. And it's like, on one point, I want to just jump on and go to bat for my people. But then at
Yeah.
another time, I realize that this person's behavior is going to come back on them. If
Oh,
you alienate your team, if you don't treat the people who are helping you realize your vision or helping you fulfill a brief or whatever, if you don't treat those people right, that is going to come back on you. And more often than not, it does.
Oh, and I think it comes back in that old kind of like Wiccan threefold type of thing, and that extends beyond the shoot. One of the things that we're probably going to go into for my tutorial with Pro EDU is team building. I think when people get into it, it becomes, well, how do I assemble a creative team? How do I put these disparate elements together into something cohesive to create high level editorial and fashion work? And so much of that is respect. So much of that is, courtesy. So much of that is love. And it's not just during the shoot. It's something as simple as when you share these images afterward, making sure that everyone is appropriately tagged, that everyone is getting their just reward for the parts that they played. And that's something that's a really big pet peeve of mine, as I see these big projects. And then, these key essential components, whatever they may be, let's say a makeup artist, suddenly they're not even named in the credits in publication or on social media. And it's like, it's a small thing, but it feels so small, but it's actually so large, because you're diminishing someone in a way where you're saying your contribution to what we created isn't even enough for me to take the time to write at so-and-so. So if you're out there and you're working on building teams or you're working with teams, I know it's easy to forget things, but just make it clear to your teams and define that to yourself, that it's so important that everyone gets their just reward. And honestly, if I'm on set and someone just comes in and holds a flag for me for a second, they're going to be on there as production assistant, because if their hands weren't there, I couldn't have got that shot. So it's just the realization that it takes a village to raise a baby, right? That old thing. Well, for high level work, it takes a community of artists and creatives and creators to make that happen. So respect your community and respect the artists who are helping you elevate yourself and your work.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I don't think it could be overstated how important it is to just treat people the way that they deserve to be treated. It doesn't seem
It's
like it should be something that requires anybody to say anything about it, but it turns out that it does.
No, it's like being in a cohabitated, space, any type of space, whether it's a living space or a studio space, and something as simple as, taking out the trash when it's full or cleaning up after yourself. Like, you shouldn't have to say these things, but you do. So
Yep.
You know, it's really important. Once again, it's oversights. You know, there's precedents that are set. People don't know until they know. You know, so I never want to, you know, if someone's doing something maliciously, I feel it prudent to call them out. And that's not because I'm an aggressive person. It's because I just, you know, someone has to stand up and I'll be that someone. Well, maybe I am kind of an aggressive person, but that's beside the point. But you know, it's there is kind of an argument for ignorance at first when someone's first getting into something.
Sure.
So it's just setting that precedent too, to be like, hey, these are professional standards and this is professional conduct and this is what's expected. And I think once that's out there, if someone knows and then they don't do that, at that point that becomes a different conversation. But there is a little bit of understanding for people who are new to the scene or to the art world or to large teams, where, you know, it's just learn from your mistakes. I think that's the other biggest thing. You know, it's fine if you do something, but do your best not to do it twice. Otherwise, you know, you're kind of being an asshole.
A little bit, just a smidge. So Stone Tree Creative says, regardless of subject, do you find that you shoot more deliberately and or differently when you shoot film versus digital?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it necessitates that. I don't think that there is an option for that. If you want to create something really significant, you know, I'm very romantic in that I love film because I love this interaction of just medium and light. You know, it's like you have this strip of celluloid and then you have light hitting it, and that interaction in the development process. And don't get me wrong, I'm a technical guy. I love the digital intermediary and the zeros and ones and, you know, my 61 megapixel high resolution sensor, blah, blah, blah. But there's something really spectacular about just a box that's holding film and a lens that's transmitting light. And so I think for me, because I do romanticize that, and because so many of my favorite photographers or the people who have influenced me are from yesteryear, are Cartier-Bresson and, you know, Irving Penn and Helmut Newton and all of these people who worked with film. I'm much more deliberate because I almost feel more connected to the craft and art of photography. And because I don't have an opportunity to fix something in post. I mean, with modern cameras, with the Sony that I shoot, I could literally shoot myself right now in the scene completely dark and pull it back up and post it online. And you would think that I nailed perfect exposure. And it's great to have that levity, but it also creates almost an opening to be lazy when you're shooting, to not take these things into consideration. And I'm not one of those people who's a purist. He's like, if you go into Photoshop, then that makes you a digital artist. No, I love Photoshop. I love the tools that we have. And believe me, if these tools were available 60 years ago when folks were shooting film, they would be leveraging and using them. They
Oh,
were
yeah.
making the most of what was available at that point in time. However, you know, I do like the meditative aspect. And going back to flow for a second, I think for me, film forces me into that flow state, which is one of the reasons why I love it. And, you know, if you're using a medium format camera and you're in that flow state and you know, click or press or, you know, whatever your camera does for the shutter, and you hear that slap, it's just this resounding bit. It's like the slap of the Big Bang, you know, this
Yeah.
creation point, and it's beautiful in its own right, in its own way. But absolutely, I'm significantly more deliberate and conscious and intentional when I'm shooting film versus digital.
It sounds a little bit like, for you, when you are taking images, that the capturing of the instant is important. Is that something for you? Because for me, I'm less interested in capturing what's happening and more interested in creating something that's already in my head. So most of the time when I'm working with people, I'm not trying to make images of them. They're becoming a character that's already in my head. And it sounds like for you that that instant of creation and that preserving of something that's real is really important.
Oh, that's very insightful, and you're absolutely accurate. And I do place a very high precedent on the moment and on capturing that moment. I mean, when I really got into photography as a young man, you know, I had a Polaroid camera, and my family moved around all the time. I mean, I was lucky to be in a place for 4 weeks or 6 weeks, so I was always the new kid. I was always leaving places, people, and things behind. So for me, having that Polaroid camera and those kind of like wind up instant cameras, it gave me an opportunity to hold on to things that were important to me, in a way for me to find some stability in a very unstable world and way of being and living, you know, as a boy. And I think I've carried that forward now. And that's why, you know, artists like Peter Lindbergh have been such a huge influence on me. Because even though I'm a very engineering type of person and I have a very technical mindset, you know, what I love about Peter's work is that it was always so spontaneous, and it was always these moments between moments, and it always felt, you know, even the angles, and it's like he wasn't sitting there going, well, you know, because of the rule of thirds, I should put Kate Moss's hand here and all of her fingers have to be shown. It was just like, wow, this is a beautiful moment and I'm here. Um, And so I try and give precedent to that. And I've always been honestly very obsessed with mortality. You know, I'm very aware of the fact that in essence, time is ticking away for all of us. And there is a finite clock on our existence, at least in this world, in this plane as we are right now. And so there's this sense of wanting to archive and capture some of that to, for a moment, slow down the relentless flow of time, and that kind of erosive process, and foray into entropy, if you will.
Yeah. Well, just it's a powerful thing. I feel like that realization of mortality seems like it has this amazing benefit of making you grateful and present,
Mm.
and the ability to appreciate what's in front of you. And also, at least for me, the opposite side of that is this feeling of immediacy, like things, I have to get things done, I have to
Mm.
do things, I'm not always going to be here, like, and then if I don't do the thing, then I feel terrible about myself, and I'm like, I'm wasting my time here on this earth, like I have to do things that matter. And it can turn into a downward spiral, right? Like
Oh,
anything that poses a danger is like, oh my god, someday I'm gonna die, like, and then you can't, it's hard to like properly
well,
function.
it is. And I think, once again, people who know me really well know that I have a bent for existentialism. And it's really easy for me to spiral into that notion of, okay, because things are finite, then what matters? And if what matters, then nothing matters. And if nothing matters, then what am I doing? And then nothing has any meaning. And it becomes this whole big thing where suddenly I'm in the corner crying, drinking Peronis or whatever the alcohol at hand is, going, what does it all mean? So it's really easy to spiral in. So like so many things, I think, to be healthy and happy and productive, as individuals and as artists, we walk such a tightrope between, being present and thinking forward. And even with being present, it's like, it's so important, but we can't only live in the now. We have to plan for the future. We have to plan for goals. We have to think about these things. So it's finding balance, whatever that balance is to the individual. And that's, I think, a lifelong journey. I don't think that's something that ever stops. It's something that's continuously evolving.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you there. I feel like that's something I'm constantly grappling with. And sometimes I feel like I've made ground. And then other times I'm like, this is never going to end. It's just, I'm going to live in this place of existential dread forever.
Yeah.
But I really love just going back to what you said earlier about the fact that you moved often. And so for you, this camera really did become a time machine. Um, and is that something that consciously influences the way that you work now, or do you think it's one of those things that's just kind of become built into who you are and so it expresses itself that way?
No, it's definitely still a very conscious process for me. I think I'm aware that even if I have an opportunity to go back, that it's never going to be quite the same. And so
Mhm.
there's this imperative for me to do that moment justice and honor, if you will. And I know that's kind of an arbitrary thing. And that can definitely be something that I use to tear myself down. But I want to say it's Susan Sontag, and I really hope I'm not misquoting here. But basically, she said that, when you photograph someone, you're participating in their own mortality, and photographs are memento mori because they themselves are reminders that things are finite. And so that quote has always been really important to me, and I'm aware of it. And going back to it, just like I try and honor the individual, I try and honor that moment, for that individual and for myself, because we may have better ones, we may have worse ones, but we will never have that one again. And so that's definitely a part of my conscious creative process, more so at times than others. But it's always a driving force at some level.
Yeah, I love that. I think you probably put into words something a lot of photographers feel and aren't always able to elucidate. So I really love that. It makes me want to quote things, write quotes on things, because it's the part of photography that I recognize is so inherently powerful. Even just today, my mom sent me a few photos she found of my dad, and
Oh,
they're portals back in time. I mean, for
yeah.
an instant, you're there and you're like, oh my God, and you remember a thing you haven't thought of in ages. And it's really interesting to me because that is not a driving force for me at all when I'm creating. I'm doing that consciously when I photograph my kids or when we go
Yeah.
places together and we do things. But for me, the other times, the camera is really just a tool to make what's in my head. It could have been a
Mm.
paintbrush, but the camera happens to be kind of the main original tool. So I find it so amazing that photography can be a vehicle for artists that are approaching it from completely different angles to still find that empowerment and that creative side and that, self-expression.
Well, and I think for me, looking at you and what you do in your style of work, it's something that's very inspirational to me. And not to go tit for tat here, but seriously,
I
I
mean,
love
feel
it.
free.
I know, but I seriously love what you bring to life, and that's something that I've been challenging myself to do more. I feel, to be kind of, I don't know, self-aggrandizing here for a second. I feel like I'm really good at. You can put me in any situation, and I'm gonna get a great photograph. I'm great spontaneously, and I don't need a lot to make something really amazing happen. I'm much less talented at bringing a defined vision to life that is coming from my own head. I can work off of a creative brief as an engineer and put all of those elements together, but actually constructing the narrative in my own head, I'm really good at looking for the narrative in the moment and finding it. I'm not so good at drafting that narrative up in my mind and then bringing it to life. So being on the other side of that coin, I look at what you do and it's kind of mind bending to me because I think about, shooting this and then shooting these plates and bringing in this light and adding all of these different elements together into something that's cogent and then going, I need to change one more thing for it to be what I was envisioning. That's almost beyond my mind. So I love that too about photography. And I also love that we as photographers who have very different styles and approaches can look at and draw inspiration from one another instead of that creating a division between us.
No, absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
I think that's a shitty thing in art and in photography is oftentimes for me, there's way too much ego. So I just love being able to have this conversation and both of us to feel, empowered and to recognize each other and laud each other and laud ourselves in the process of that. I think that's really important. Dialogue is important. And when we lift each other up, we lift ourselves up.
Agreed.
So
Yeah.
I love that in this right now.
Agreed. A rising tide, right? Raises all
Yes.
ships.
Yes.
Oh, Jarrett says, all photographs are memento mori. To take a photograph is to participate in another person or thing's mortality, vulnerability, mutability. And yes, it was Susan Sontag.
Thank you so much. I knew I misquoted it. I was close, but not close enough.
You were right there. You were right there.
I just reversed some things. It's my quote dyslexia. It's a rare syndrome that I have.
That I just made up, but it's completely accurate.
Yeah, look on Urban Dictionary. It's there.
It's a real thing. Yeah, I wish and I hope that more photographers get that into their mindset and if, share this, people, because there's something really beautiful in the photography community and then also really toxic in the photography community, which is this strange thing where half of the time we're supporting one another and lifting one another up. And then in the other half of the time, we're competitive and we're tearing each other down and we're talking about people behind their backs and we're, leaving really, really mean comments on people's articles on f-stoppers or whatever, we're looking for ways to tear each other down, which is insane to me. And I don't know what it is in human nature that kind of pushes us to do that, whether it's this need to define ourselves or separate ourselves or make ourselves feel like we know that they don't know, or whatever it is. It just is really incredibly unfortunate. And I think if we're ever going to tackle that unhealthy relationship between individual photographers, groups of photographers, and the photography community, we have to appreciate the fact that not all photographers are coming from the same place. We don't all deal with what we do in the same manner. Our motivations to create images aren't always the same. And that doesn't make any one photographer or genre or style better or worse than the other.
Well, no, and I agree wholeheartedly, and I'll reference just two really quick stories. And when I first kind of started out and I shot my first show, it was one of those like raw artist collectives. It was a fashion show. And, and I have my very strong opinions about those, but
I've been there. I feel
we'll
you.
We'll both breathe on this. However, I do think it's a great place for artists to feel empowered and to start showing their work. And I think it could be a great step, kind of the other negative aspects aside of that. But I shot the show and then I shared some images that I was really proud of. And I kind of got passive aggressively fried by another photographer in the community who was like, oh, you're using this type of light and this and this, and this is mine. All these photographers copying me. And it was this very, aggressive bit that kind of was making it sound like this technique was proprietary to them. And I got super pissed at the time. And I drafted up this, and I'm good with words. I drafted up this very passive aggressive, nasty novella of a fucking Facebook post and posted it very congratulatorily and was like, hmm. And I sat there pompously for about an hour, and then I just sunk back and felt really bad because I was participating in the very thing that I wanted to work against. And I think even in terms of technique and stuff, I think people only hold on to things very tightly if they're not confident in the authenticity of their own expression. Um, I know what I do. No one's going to do it the way that I do it. And so that's why I'm open to freely giving it all away, because I'm not worried about someone creating my work. I want someone to create their work. And if I can be a catalyst on their journey, but no one's going to do anything the way that I do, or that you do, Nicole, or that you do, Kelly, or Matt, or Kat, or Rosa, or hopefully the millions of people who are watching us right now. But seriously, so I think it's just this bit where, focus on yourself. And if you are on the end of that attack, if someone comes at you, whether it's digital or online, it's understanding that really it's rooted in their own insecurity and in their lack of skill and in their lack of authenticity. And so not allowing that to eat away at you as an individual, seeing it for what it is, and just kind of tipping your hat and smiling and waving and going, I hope you find yourself, so that you don't feel the need to do this and be like this. And it's liberating to not engage with that type of shit. Is hard as it is for me, someone who wants to just go to bat on those types of things. It's never worth my time. And I always feel better if I just keep doing my own thing.
Yeah, it's really, really hard to withdraw yourself from the urge to go and handle business when somebody starts with that kind of nonsense, because, and I think some photographers, and this, I mean, I think this goes for people in general, but when you run the show, right? Like when people step onto my set, they're like my babies now. And I'm like mama hen of the set. And so when people do that to other people in the community who I feel like are my people,
Yeah,
I just have this need to be like, don't do it,
of
shit. Like,
course.
come on, get in order. But you do, especially when you have kind of exposure to the community at large, you really do have to withdraw yourself a little bit, because number one, it's not productive. Number two, chances that those people are going to listen to you are slim. And number three, it's immediate for anybody who feels like you're coming after them to get defensive. And so obviously they're going to be way less receptive to anything that you have to say at that point. So you do definitely have to kind of remove yourself from the desire to do that. However, back to what you were saying before, I think that's so powerful, and I hope people are paying attention, that somebody can use your settings, they can use your camera, they can shoot with your model, they can use the same wardrobe, and they're not going to produce the same images that you're going to produce, because they are them and you are you. And vision is the most important part. Everything else serves vision. So whether you share your technique or a style, or if somebody's shooting something the way that you shoot something, it's not going to be the way that you do it. Granted that it's not an out and out plagiarism, but you have to be confident in the fact that you are you, and another photographer is not going to take that away from you by mimicking your style.
And I think that also kind of leads into the idea of critiques and getting feedback on work. And the reality is that you're only accountable to yourself. And that happens a lot online, where it's like I'll post something and it'll get a reception, and someone's like, well, what I would have done is crop this differently, and I would have put more light into the eyes. And my response is like, I appreciate your perspective. Like, I can see how that would have changed the image. I did it this way because. So I always use that as an opportunity to say, hey, like, I really appreciate you saying what you said, because sometimes I've actually went back and reshot something that way and been like, oh, that's great. But I also use it as a means to kind of like educate other photographers on my process. You're right. Maybe that's considered technically proficient. I didn't do it for these specific reasons, because this is what I was trying to achieve. And that's because I'm accountable to myself in my work. I'm not accountable to that person or anyone else in my art. And so remembering that, it goes back to intention. Like, why are you doing what you do? And regardless of what someone did, I mean, they could take the pic, an insane picture that I would go, oh, I don't like that. But if I asked them about it and they were like, well, I did it because of this and this, and if there's some reasoning and rationale and intent behind it, I'm like, wow, you did a great job bringing that to fruition. And it's always remembering that there is no right and wrong. That, I mean, we're in a very technical medium, but art is not technical. Art is expression. So express yourself and use whatever techniques and settings and whatever else you need to or have available to you to bring that vision or idea to life, and don't get mired in the bullshit.
Yeah, it's such an interesting thing. I find this critique for some people is incredibly empowering. critique for other people is like heart destroying.
Yes.
And I personally know that I found so much growth early on through critique, but it was because I was getting critique from people whose opinions I valued, who was creating the kind of work that I wanted to create, and who were doing things I wanted to be able to do. And
Yes.
so that for me was a catalyst for growth. Like, I can't tell you how many times the lovely and wonderful Carrie Bean was like, you don't do that, honey. I'm like, okay, Carrie. But because she was, willing to put that out there for me, I was able to kind of take those things and make changes. That being said, I was asking for critique.
Mm,
And I think there's a big difference
very
between just
different.
putting your work out into the world and being like, I made a thing, versus saying, hey guys, I want to know how I might be able to improve this. And then you have to, of course, weigh those. Ooh, I'm whacking my pop filter here. You have to be able to, I know, talking with my hands. You have to be able to weigh those opinions and decide which ones are, actually apropos to what you're doing, and which ones are maybe just somebody's. Often I've gotten what could have been a valid critique or opinion from somebody that doesn't actually apply to what I'm trying to do, or
Yeah.
to the kind of work that I like. And so a lot of how you use that definitely comes down to the individual, and whether or not what somebody's giving you actually applies to what you want to do.
No, and that's so true. And I think the other side of it too, in terms of actually giving critiques, like I was, it was some time ago. I mean, it was almost 2 years ago now. I won a workshop. I won a seat in a workshop with Felix Coons and
Yes.
Pratik Naik out at Sue Bryce's studio. And it was brilliant. It was a turning point for me because I got to spend time with all of these, people I admired. And I won't even get into that because I'll start tearing up legitimately. It was a life-changing experience for me. Thank you so much to both of you and to Sue for allowing me into that space, because it changed my life. But one of the things that I love about Felix's approach to lighting and studio lighting is people will always ask him questions, and he's this really charismatic character if you don't know him, and he has a great accent. He's once again, he's just very charismatic.
He does have a great accent.
And he has good style in hats, which is the real reason I like him. Everything else can just fuck off. But what he'll do with people is they'll say, well, what do you think, Felix? And he's like, well, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about what you did? And I think that's so important, and it's so profound, and it's so powerful, because it's like, before I'm going to tell someone what my opinions are, what are their opinions? And then their opinions are going to frame my opinions, because I'm going to learn more about what they did, what they were trying to do. And that's going to let me know how I can provide constructive criticism that hopefully will allow them to better achieve that goal moving forward. So, I think on that critique side of things too, for me, at least, I have a problem with authority, which you probably can't tell about anything in my life, but I'm very adamantly opposed to hierarchy.
No, you
I don't
look just like a cog in the machine. I don't know why you would say that.
I've been waiting my whole life to hear someone say that to me. But, I look at everyone, like all of us is with cameras, I look at all of us as creators and artists, and I don't see, well, I'm better than you and that type of thing. And I know that sounds really trite, but I think we're all on this journey. And so it's dialogue. I think that's the biggest thing, especially when it comes to critique and that type of interaction. I'm not talking at someone, and I don't think anyone should be talked at. I think we should have conversations surrounding work and surrounding growth and surrounding skill. And when it becomes a two-way street, it's better for everyone involved. And then there's not room for the bullshit and, the hate and the loathing and the dysfunction and the destructive crap to kind of find its way in. So, if you're not looking to engage in a dialogue, then I say just don't say anything at all. That's my opinion to the people out there who shouldn't be saying anything at all. I'm talking to you.
You know who you are.
You know who you are.
They do know.
They do.
No, I completely agree. And when we're doing critique for the Photographers Roundtable, the goal is always to look at an image first as if it would stand on its own. So if you were coming across an image, does it stand on its own? And I think by getting that feedback, it helps people realize whether or not they've actually accomplished what they wanted to accomplish. Because if you send an image sight unseen, we know nothing about it, and to us it looks like an advertorial, but what you were trying for was senior portrait, then that gives some visual clues as to whether or not you were able to kind of accomplish what you were going for. But I definitely think, and often we ask people, let us know, were we close to the mark? What were your intentions? That way we can kind of continue the dialogue after that and be like, okay, so sometimes people will be trying to do a thing and they will fall just a little bit short. And maybe
Hmm.
the things we noticed are the places that they, could potentially work on. But sometimes, people will be aiming for something, and maybe what they want is a juxtaposition that looks like
Yeah.
something, and there are subtle clues that we might have missed. So it's always an interesting thing to undertake, to try to critique somebody's work and let them know from an outside perspective how it's being received. But it always does have to be undertaken with that realization that somebody is entrusting their baby to you, and that you are, giving people feedback. Not everyone has a thick skin.
Yeah.
I'm pretty difficult to hurt at this point. I
Same.
think you
Same.
can't have like been exposing yourself
Yeah.
for a
You're
long time.
callous. Yeah.
Yeah, you do, man. Your skin gets thick. But some people do not have that, and it's really, really easy to break people and to watch them leave when they are still so. It's a good thing to be so connected to your work that it matters to you. It's also can be a deficit, especially if your goal is to put your work out to masses of people. And I don't think there's, like, when I was a medic, you have to find a balance between caring about the people that
Mm,
you're working with enough to give them the care that they need and deserve, and also separating yourself enough that you don't break every single time somebody
yeah.
is hurt or injured. And so you're fine of walking that fine line
Yeah.
between, investing yourself in your work and putting it out there to the world, and then realizing that you are not your work, and that your work can stand aside, separate from you, and that it's not for everybody. It's okay if some people, don't love it. Um, you have to be able to walk that tightrope, and it's emotionally a lot harder than it
Yeah.
might seem.
Well, you're absolutely right. And, I think I just had a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and I think one thing that isn't discussed often enough, in my opinion, is the influence of perspective bias. And
Mm,
especially when you're the one who's creating. It's strange. There's a lot of photos that I've put out there into the social ether, and I was expecting a certain response, and I didn't get it, and I was like, well, shit, what's going on? And these people just don't have taste. They don't know what they're talking about. I got all self-righteous. But then the reality was, like, a lot of what I felt about that image had nothing to do with the image itself. It was because of the experience. It was because after I shot that image, someone came up to me and they looked at it and they were like crying, and they went, oh my God, I didn't know I could look like that. And so I projected that experience onto the image. So my value of the image far supersedes the value anyone else can place on it because of the experience that I associate with it. So I think that's another important thing to talk to photographers about, and for us to have discussions about as photographers, is when we create, we inherently are going to develop these connections with our work that we can't possibly hope for anyone else to have, because that is singularly our own. So there is the work that we create, and then there's the experience that we essentially manufacture while we're creating that work. And when those two things come together, it's beautiful and profound for us as artists. But there almost has to be some differentiation when we do release that into the wild, so to speak, knowing that someone else isn't going to know how we felt when we clicked the shutter. They're not going to get those same warm and fuzzies because they weren't there. So that it's a really weird psychological thing, but it's really relevant, and it's something I've had to address over and over in my own head as I put my work out there, receive feedback, submit for publication, come in on briefs, all of these different types of things. So it's going back to it, like you said, it's perfect. It's a very, very fine line to walk.
I love that, and I think it's such a powerful thing for photographers and artists in general to consider, is just what you said. I mean, it's something, as writers, that we say a lot, which is kill your darlings.
Mm-hmm.
And you have these things that you create, and you love them not just because of the thing themselves, but there's, like, as an example, one particular image I had in my head I wanted to make. I wanted this really glowing romantic scene, of these little girls and their potentially older sister or a mother reading, outside in a kind of Edwardian garden-esque feel. And I had the picture in my head, so I knew what I wanted to make. And it took a long time to bring the people together and get the costuming and the makeup and the hair, and then get to the scene. And of course, the light was in the perfect place for backlighting, and it just, everything fell together. And watching it happen in the moment as the photographer was like watching a movie come to life. So it was
Yeah.
really this beautiful. So there's all of these things tied to the creation
Yeah.
of this image that an outsider would never understand. They would look at that and they would be like, well, they're a little bit green. you know, okay, so maybe the light bouncing off the grass wasn't,
Yeah.
completely accounted for in post-production at first. It has since been fixed, but that's besides the point. There's more to the image for me than there ever could be for an
So
outside
true.
viewer, because they didn't get to experience those things. So I think there's that moment like of recognizing, for me, the act of creation has its own inherent value
Mm.
based on just the act itself and everything that surrounds the act. And then for the viewer, that is a completely different experience. They're seeing it based on their experience with the world, what color glasses they're wearing. I mean, do they have, well, they always hated kind of Edwardian style art because they saw a movie when they were young, and you never know. So I think once your baby goes out into the world, it is its own person. And my children are my children, but they're not mine. They are themselves, and they're going to experience the world in a way separate from me. And their value doesn't come from me, it comes from them.
Yeah.
I was just part to the creation that happened. So it might be a big part of me and a very important part of me, but it still is its own thing. It gets to go live its own life now.
Well, it's very, very true, and that's, I think that's very poignant. And, also as kind of an addendum to that, I think is photographers are evolving, especially in their technical skills. And I know this has been true for me when my whole bit was, okay, I'm going to master studio lighting, or I don't think anyone ever masters something. I'm going to get good at it. I'm going to work on it. My whole obsession with all of my images was lighting. That's all that I could see in my images. I lost track of posing. I lost track of hands. I lost track of color grading to some extent. So as you're learning as a photographer, artist in any medium, whatever you're focusing on that time, that's going to become how you gauge your work. And so, let's say you have this beautiful Rembrandt light, but someone's kind of pirate-eyed and they have this weird gang sign hand and you can't see it. And then all of a sudden you release that and you're like, it was Rembrandt light. It was amazing. Everyone's going to love this. And then someone's like, yo, what the fuck's up with their hand? And you're like, what do you mean? And so, there's that.
Indignation just,
yeah.
How dare you?
And so there's that as well. And that's a really important part too. So it's funny, but as we evolve, it's that old adage, when you buy a red car, suddenly every car on the road is red. Well, there aren't more red cars. You just notice them. And then everyone's operating on that wavelength. So it's kind of like we're all connected, but we're all disconnected, and we're all somewhere on our journey, and we're all seeing things differently. Number one, because we're individuals, but we're all seeing things differently because we're looking for different things in what we see.
That's such a good point.
That kind of subjectivity in perception and interpretation, I think, is very important to remember as artists, especially when we have these online platforms where you could put something out in a group and get, just fried with comments of people who aren't seeing your work in the same way. So it's the feedback, I think, is absolutely important, but it also has to be taken with a grain of salt relative to who you are, what you're doing, where you're going, what you want to do, and all of the things that make you up as a magical, singularly unique snowflake and all that good shit. So that's the end of my rant. I'll stop ranting on that.
I love that. I agree 100%. And Kelly says, I'm my work. We are one and the same, which is so interesting because it just goes back to how all of us approach what we do from a different perspective and relate to what we do in a different way. Reality Reimagined question: do you think it's healthy or normal with some work to be more excited about the social or client response than your own excitement about creating the art in the first place?
No, I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. I think relative to our work, there's always going to be different driving factors and different points of validation or what we're trying to achieve. I think when you're working with the client, you should absolutely be concerned with what that client thinks about what you produce. If I'm shooting some fine art stuff and it's strange and there's, a skull and a slug and I don't know, flames and leaves and clouds. I'm just doing a whole Kaiser Sose because I'm looking out my window.
I expect to see this.
I'm just seeing these elements and putting them together in this window. But if I'm doing that, I'm accountable to myself. But if you're creating something for a client and they come to you and they're paying you, obviously there's the artistic element and the integrity of they're coming to you for who you are and what you do, but you are accountable to them in their response. So I think it's great to be excited when I deliver something to a client, especially when it's printed and when they hold it and they're elated or they're excited or they're emotional and I can tell that they love it. That's validating to me as an artist and as an individual and as a professional. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And there's times when you're going to shoot a project and you're going to almost not give a shit about what the client thinks because you're going to love it. And then either it's going to turn out really well or really bad when you get to that point, when you're in a sales session or in a delivery or, in a room full of other creatives, if it's a commercial project, and they're like, what the fuck did you do? But no, I don't think, once again, I don't think there is a wrong or right for anybody at any point in time. I think there's maybe like healthy things and unhealthy things, but I think that shifts so much. What drives me today isn't going to drive me tomorrow. What drives Nicole right now isn't necessarily going to be a driving force for her in a week. So I think run with whatever feels motivated, but also at the same time, don't place so much value that you're going to be shattered should that validation not come. If you deliver something to a client and they go, I don't like this. I don't like that at all. That's terrible. And you're like, okay, well, shit. Well, now I'm horrible. I gave my client a terrible image and life is bad. And I'm just going to go home and everything sucks. And it's like, it's easy to fall into that, but you don't know the reasons why. So it's hard. It's going back to, being a medic. And it's like back in the day, way back in the day, I was an EMT and did that whole bit. And so how do you maintain objectivity while also maintaining compassion? And it's the same thing for artists. So I wish I had a magical formula for everyone out there to say, this is how you navigate those murky waters. I don't, because I'm also navigating those waters. But you kind of have to find your own answer in that. But no, certainly not. You should be excited about a client response, while at the same time not being devastated should that client response not be up to your standards, so to speak. I guess
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. I think that's right on. I think that goes back, the way that I kind of conceptualize this idea is the difference between being a craftsman and an artist. And that, I think, doesn't necessarily mean that this is like the objective truth, right? This is just the way I conceptualize it. But in my mind, when you're a craftsman, you're using a set of tools in order to bring something about, whether that is a chair or a photograph. And a lot of times clients will come to you as a craftsman. They know that you're a master of your trade. And of course they appreciate your vision, but they're expecting you to use those tools in order to give them what they need.
Yes.
And then at other times, the entire point is to start a conversation or explore an idea or communicate something that, you feel very deeply and that you don't necessarily have maybe the words to express. And in those moments, you become, to me, at least, an artist, because the entire purpose of it is expression. So I agree. It comes back down to intention. Why are you creating the thing that you're creating? And what role are you playing at that particular point in time? Because there have certainly been times when somebody comes to me for a portrait and I'm making what they want. And I'm not super thrilled about what I'm making, but they love it. And if they love it, then I'm happy. And then there's other times when I'm making a thing for myself and I'm so turned on and I'm so into the moment. And somebody else might look at it and be like, but that doesn't matter because that was for me.
No, I think that's a really, really powerful definition and separation. And I think that it's important to keep those things separate. Even as professional artists, like I consider myself a professional artist, but it's not like I'm a professional artist on a grant where I just get to go out and create whatever I want, however I want, whenever I want. I think I said whenever twice. So I'm a redundant artist. That's fine. But I'm beholden to my clients, whether they're commercial clients or whether they're individuals. If someone comes to me and I choose to accept the job. So that's the other part of it. If I choose to accept that job or that brief, I am now beholden to whatever is expected from me relative to my skill set. But if I am creating something on my own, so if you're the type of person where you're like, shit, I'm not, you hold photography in a certain light and you're like, I'm not going to just take a picture of a puppy with a frilly collar on in front of a canvas backdrop. That's not me. Well, then don't take that job. Don't get into that bit. And if you do accept that job, don't complain about it because that was your decision. So I'm not saying do or don't do anything, but be aware of what the trade-offs are. You can be an artist who's accountable to no one but yourself. You're going to have a really hard time supporting yourself as an artist if that's your prerogative in our medium. And I'm not, obviously there's certain people who do it. They're very rare. So just know that if you want to make a living with photography, there's going to be times when you get to realize your vision. And there's going to be a lot of times when you put your vision aside to realize someone else's vision. And that's an opportunity for you to grow technically. That's an opportunity for you to grow in a lot of other ways outside of your personal expression. But it really comes down to what drives you, what you want to achieve, and what you're willing to sacrifice to achieve those desired ends, really.
Yeah. Super, super good point. We are about 15 minutes past our general hour or so, but it's been such a great conversation that hopefully people will forgive us. I mean, they're still in. So, guys, we are like coming up to it. So if you have any more questions for Jonny, please make sure that you put them in the chat section. That way we can get to them before we sign off officially. Reality Reimagined says, those are both wonderful answers, most appreciated. I think I spend more time creating artwork to bring recognition to the brand and eventual revenue than I do creating art for myself, which is completely still a legitimate reason to do photography.
Absolutely.
Some people are photographers to make money, and that is as legitimate a reason to pick up a camera as anything else.
Yeah. And I don't, you know, what I would never want to see happen is one genre or one outlook or approach disparage another. There's nothing wrong with any of those things. Whether you're driven, you know, kind of like the tortured artist, and you're like, I have to create with my camera because otherwise the voices inside my head won't stop and I'm going to have a breakdown. Or whether you're like, shit, I'm going to create with my camera because I'm all about that paper and I want to go to Costa Rica. Like those are both great reasons, and you're accountable to your own reasons, and they're all valid. And, you know, regardless of what someone is, and if you're on the artistic side, respect the people who are on the commercial side. If you're on the commercial side, respect the people who are on the artistic side. Like, there's no competition, there's no heat, and it's not a disparaging or diminishing thing. Like, be true to yourself and respect other people who are being true to themselves, and everything else kind of falls into place if you operate on that very simple yet very challenging paradigm.
Yeah, agree. I agree 100%. So if we don't have any more questions popping up, then I think I want to start closing in general with this.
Okay.
And the reason is because I have only recently discovered through a rather wonderful conversation with a friend of mine named Jason Matthias, and hopefully I get him on here at some point, because rather like yourself, he's one of those people that you can talk kind of philosophy of photography with, which I love. And he really, really pushed me to continue asking myself, okay, why? Like, I want to make this work. Okay, why? Well, this thing is important to me. Okay, why? Like, to push that all the way back until I got to a point where I was like, wow, I realized that I love to make work centered around fantasy, because for me, that has always been the safe place and the promise of being able to overcome, and that people are more than they seem, and that there's magic out there. And, you know, so it pushed me back to that place where I had to go all the way back to my childhood and be like, damn, okay. So now I realize why I do that. And so when I make these things, in part that's for me, and in part it's to remind other people that you are more than what you seem, and that the world is far more magical than you could possibly believe if you're willing to look at it that way. And so what I want to know from you is, what is your why?
You know, having moved around a lot as a kid, and there were all sorts of legal ramifications that I probably shouldn't get into, or my lawyer would advise me not to. But suffice it to say, when I was a child, there was just a lot of weight on me. And so I basically had to take on all of these different roles. Like at one point, you know, there were like the police involved, and they were kind of after us. And so I was using like alternative names and alternative birth dates. And I essentially had to take on a new identity. So I really wasn't myself. I was literally an actor, and I was pretending to be someone else, and I was wearing a mask. And so as I moved into adolescence, and as I moved, you know, kind of into early adulthood, I continued wearing those masks, not because I had to, but because it felt comfortable. And so throughout that entire period of time, being a sensitive person, being an artistic person, despite it all that I wanted to do was to be seen and heard, yet I wouldn't take off the mask so that anyone else could see me. And so with my work, I think what I aspire to do is act as a conduit and create a safe space and set of circumstances for people to remove their masks and to be whoever they are, so that they could be seen and heard and validated, whole and undivided and unadulterated, because people who they are in that state are so ridiculously fucking beautiful and magical and amazing. And so that's something that I still strive for myself. And it's something that brings me so much fulfillment to give to others. And if I could do that for one person, then all of these years of sacrifice and of grinding, all of these years of effort, every single moment that I put into this is worth it for me, if someone can have that through me. And that's my why.
I absolutely fucking love that. Love it. Love it. Love it. Thank you, Jonny. Thank you for
Thank
being
you.
on today for this great, long overdue conversation. I
Very
am
overdue.
down to have the philosophy of photography conversations anytime. I find this stuff so engaging.
It needs to be like a Tuesday, Thursday thing. I think we need to do it like twice a week.
Just get on and philosophize, man.
I'm all the philosophizing all the time.
So we've got everybody just kind of chiming in at the last minute. I just have love. That's all. Amazing conversation. Great job, you guys. Time flies. I feel the being your work. So it seems I love that everybody was so engaged in the conversation as well. So thank you guys so much to the comment section for being here.
Thank you everyone for being here. It means a lot. And thank you, Nicole, for having me. Like I adore you and your work and who you are as a person. And just as a side note to everyone out there, Nicole and I just had a conversation, and despite all of the chaos with the pandemic, she's been a stalwart in offering positivity and support and love to the community, in empowering people and being a voice for the voiceless and helping those who are in need. And the world needs more of that. So thank you, Nicole, not just for, this, but for being the person that you are, because people like you are in short supply.
Are you trying to make me cry on camera?
I'm trying, but I'm not doing a very good job.
I was an actress, so I have to control myself. But thank you so much. I can't tell you how much I appreciate that. And it's good to know that the emotional work of trying to present that for people does actually work, I guess. It's emotional labor, in some ways. And so I appreciate knowing that it matters to people.
Well, it's a labor of love, and you are loved for it. So
thank you, sir. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
My
Thank
pleasure.
you so much for coming on. And I can't tell you how nice it is to be able to not only have this conversation, but just to be able to really get to the heart of things and honesty and vulnerability, and be able to kind of express and expose those things. I love that. So I'm so glad that you were on. I appreciate you being here. Before I say goodbye to you in person, I'll just close everything out. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. All of Jonny's links will be in the description below, including if you are interested in kind of tapping Jonny for a mentor session. He is on a photo mentor as part of the Pro EDU team, and his tutorial is going to be out sometime within the next year, I think, hopefully.
I hope so.
Yeah. If everything goes according to plan. So make sure that you're paying attention to that. Go check out his website and follow him on Instagram. Give him some love.
I follow back, y'all. I will follow back.
Go find his amazing work. And if you guys are finding this content helpful, interesting, etc., please go ahead and like this, subscribe, share it if you think other people would find it valuable. And who do I have? Oh, I've got Renee Robin coming up on the 28th. She will be here. And then
the original
Pauline,
bad bitch.
Yes, she is. And then Pauline, also Goyard, who is in the comments section right now and saying that this was inspiring and she has good vibes for the night. She will be here with me on this Friday. She is an incredible artist, so please be here for that as well.
I'll be coming back for both of those, everyone out there. So if you care about me at all, you'll be there too, or you're going to break my heart.
Don't break his heart, guys.
Don't break my heart. I'm broken enough. Don't break me more.
Build him back up. Be here this Thursday and Friday. All right, that's it for today. Thank you guys so much, and I will be seeing you hopefully on Thursday.
Bye, everyone. Take care.